first of all, a very warm welcome to you all. I'm going to turn to the camera properly instead of the big screen. A very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for taking some time this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on where you're coming in from, to join us for today's webinar and introduction to or kind of reflection on the work of the Diagram project. My name is William Kilbride, and I'm the Director of the Digital Preservation Coalition, and it's my privilege and my pleasure to welcome you and to share today's proceedings with you. As Jen has mentioned already, I wonder if I could encourage you, please, to where you see your name on the participant list or indeed on the big panel in front with all the faces, if you could click on there, click on your name and just put a proper name, a real name as it were, whatever name you'd like to be called by today, let's just say that, to add your name, and if you wouldn't mind also adding your institution, that would be helpful. So it just forms the equivalent, virtually speaking, the equivalent of a name badge as you would get at any conference. So first of all, get you on to do that while I do a bit more of a warm up. So we're coming now to the end of the Diagram project. It's been about a year. In fact, I'm kind of reflecting at the start. I remember going to the National Archives at Kew, it seems like in the before times, to talk about this with Martine and Alex and David and Hannah and colleagues to reflect kind of at the beginning of the project. That's about 9 months ago now, maybe like 10 months ago now. And so the project team have been working hard. And this isn't our first rodeo. This isn't their first webinar. In fact, it's been one of many because we've been through quite a sophisticated iterative process of design and implementation of this decision tool, which we're going to turn our attention to in a few minutes. So we come towards the end of the project, therefore this is rather more in the mode of dissemination rather than feedback. Nonetheless, feedback I think is always welcome because one can only imagine that there's a phase 2 or a phase 3 or a phase 15. I've lost count of the phases, but there's more work I'm sure still here to come. And of course, the purpose of this is to develop a working tool which is of wide impact and wide relevance, and so that feedback will always be welcome. We should start also with thanks to the sponsors. We thank the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the EPSRC Impact Acceleration Fund, both of whom have sponsored this project. Obviously, this would otherwise have been a face-to-face workshop or event, maybe tacked at a conference or maybe a standalone event in the lovely conference room at the National Archives of fond memory. Of course, we've moved online. So a word or two about the interface. You know this already if you've been to any DPC events. First of all, we encourage you to mute your microphone when you're not speaking, because that will reduce the amount of background noise. Obviously, unmute your microphone when you do want to speak, stands to reason. Secondly, we encourage you to use the non-verbal communication, the non-verbal feedback button. So you'll see the reactions button, for example, which allows me for once and only time to give you 3 thumbs up at the same time. So encourage you please to use the non-verbal feedback so the speakers know you're there and responding and thinking about it. And of course that includes not just the symbolic feedback, but there's also the chat box. So maybe someone could write something in the chat box just to say hello and to prove that it's there. Cameras. Okay, so always we're going to encourage you to keep your cameras off. It reduces the bandwidth necessary. However, if I wonder for just 1 second we could get you to turn your cameras on as usual. Again, you'll know this from DPC work previously. It's lovely to see you. It's lovely to have the faces on screen, and it shows to the participants, it shows to each other, and it shows to the people who are going to present that there is really an audience out there, and we're very, very happy to see you. And I think John's going to do the usual thing now of capturing a shot of us all. So if you're content, a big cheery wave to the camera, and of course you can capture your own version of the webinar as you so choose. So I'm assuming that's done. I'm getting the thumbs up from John. That's brilliant. Also to say, of course, we're going to be recording the webinar. Okay, so we're assuming that you're content with that recording. Obviously, if there's any concerns about the recording, let me know, let John know, or Jen Mitchum as hosts for the workshop today. So and I think the recording has begun already. I can see that the symbol's there for the recording. So the recording has begun. We meet as the DPC, we meet under the DPC kind of banner. The DPC is and seeks always to be an open, friendly, understanding, collaborative, innovative, supportive community. We sustain that atmosphere among a membership which is growing and changing and becoming more diverse through time. And we welcome that growth and we welcome that diversification. And so we want you to feel comfortable emotionally, physically, technologically. We want to acknowledge and celebrate the benefits of the diversity of that community. We want you to be able to share your thoughts and experiences freely. We want you to be encouraged to participate in the productive dialogue that we're going to have in the next hour. That means also, to some extent, listening respectfully to others' ideas and opinions, even if they differ from your own, and encouraging you to initiate with complex pieces of work which are going to benefit all sorts of people within the wider community. So that's all I had to say by way of introduction. I will very quickly now hand on to Alex Green and colleagues from the National Archives. Alex is going to set the scene for us and then hand the baton on to other colleagues to take us through the work to date. So thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks, William. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you very much for coming and joining us. My colleague Hannah is sharing slides, so you'll hear me asking her to move things on just to explain what's going on there. Right, so I'm Alex Green. I am the Digital Preservation Service Owner at the National Archives, and I'm here with Dr. Martine Barons and David Underdown to talk about Diagram, the Digital Archiving Graphical Risk Assessment Model. So slide 2, please. So digital preservation risks. One of the biggest challenges in preserving digital records is understanding and balancing the various risks to the collection. And these can range from poor metadata and obsolete software to storage conditions and physical disasters such as floods. And as we know, every archive is unique in its situation, priorities and resources. Up until now, these risks have had to be estimated quite broadly and considered in isolation, with no way of finding evidence that one approach would be more effective in preserving the records than another. Next slide. So over the last year, we have been creating a model using a statistical risk management approach, which involved creating a Bayesian network with conditional probabilities, which I am leaving to Martine to describe in the next section. This allowed us to think about risks and how they're connected and impact one another. So using this model, we've built an online tool that provides archivists with evidence to help them decide which interventions will ensure that their digital records can be most effectively preserved. Next slide. So, why is digital preservation so hard? I'd like to give some more context as to why we thought there's a need for this tool. So we know there's a variety of threats to digital archives and digital material generally. We all know, first of all, that technology is evolving rapidly. It just doesn't stay still. So here at the National Archives, we are struggling with preserving email discussions with multiple threads, multiple attachments, and the assortment of image footers. We also are concerned about the machine learning algorithms, such as those used in government to make decisions. And we also have entire databases with their associated documentation to preserve as well. As a profession, we are constantly having to make decisions about preserving new formats and technologies that didn't exist until recently. So a further threat is that some of the existing standards are outdated. There is a focus in some standards on the technical challenge of building a digital repository, which takes a great deal of time and money. But relying on standards that require a technical solution can be potentially harmful, as we miss opportunities to mitigate other, perhaps more pressing risks. So we want to equip ourselves with tools that target our investment to drive better evidence-based outcomes for archives. And thirdly, there is a skills gap across the archive sector. Archives are moving from an era of relative stability in archival practice, principally with analogue material, to one of continual change. Each new generation of digital technology gives rise to a new set of risks with which archives must keep pace. The archive sector workforce development strategy was published in October 2018 and it identified a need for an increase in digital skills. A subsequent survey of UK archives last year provided further evidence on the current skills shortage. So there is a widening gap between the resources we have and the resources we need, and the techniques that could help close this gap, good risk management supported by sound evidence and robust statistics, are currently beyond the reach of the archive sector. So next slide please, Hannah. These threats are what the project and the tool will help address, as you can see there, by improving archivists' understanding of risks to digital records, enabling them to compare and prioritise the threats, and allowing them to quantify them in order to develop strategies and to help support business cases. So, who is involved? Initially, we explored making a risk model for the digital archives. So we invited academics at Warwick University in the Applied Statistics and Risk Unit, including Martine, to work with us to create a mini model. And once we were happy that the approach was feasible, we decided to share it with the archive community, but realised it would be very TNA centric. So to remedy this, we put in a bid for funding from the National Heritage Lottery Fund so we could involve the wider archive sector. This was successful and we were able to involve archivists from these 5 other organisations along with DPC, who have helped disseminate our findings and also evaluate the project. All these organisations and more actually have contributed to the model and we are very grateful for their help. So how does Diagram work? Diagram is a web-based interactive tool that provides archivists with a score for the risks to their collections. The score is based on the 2 most important factors in preserving digital records: how much intellectual control of the records the archive has, meaning how much technical, descriptive, access and contextual metadata it has about the records, and renderability, i.e. whether the archive can provide a useful representation of the original record. So to use the tool, you answer 16 tools about the archive's policies and its holdings, and the model uses these answers and underlying model of probabilities to tell you what percentage of 100 files you will be able to render and you have intellectual control of. The archivist can then create a scenario by changing her answers to some of those questions and compare the new scores against original scores to see if the risk has increased or decreased. You can then use this knowledge to focus your resources on what will have the biggest impact on the record's preservation. You could also use the score as evidence to support a business case for increased funding. So for example, you may store all your archives on USB hard drives, but if instead you store them in the cloud, how much of an impact would that have on the successful preservation of the records? And Diagram will show you by reflecting the change in the risk score between one scenario and the other. I'll now hand over to Martine to describe how the model was built and the maths. Thanks, Martine.
Thank you. So I'm Martine Barons and I'm the Director of the Applied Statistics and Risk Unit. This has been a very exciting project. We're really enjoying doing this. So Bayesian statistics is the power behind Diagram. And it seems very complicated to the uninitiated, but there's a simple way of thinking about this. If my team is in a league of 20 teams, if I know nothing, then my team has a 1 in 20 chance of winning. If I know that my team came in the top half last year, I might think my team's chances are better than 1 in 20, say 3 in 20. Then I get some additional information, and the information I get is that we've got 2 new players and a new coach. And then I think that my team has now got a 6 in 20 chance of winning the league. So I had a prior probability based on what the team did last year. And when I received information about the players and about the coach, my subjective probability was updated in the light of the data. And essentially, that's the heart of Bayesian statistics. Next slide, please. As we mentioned before, the particular flavour of Bayesian statistics is a Bayesian network, and this allows us to show the relationships between the different subsystems that go up to make the overall system. The ovals with the words in are called the nodes, and the arrows showing where the relationship is we call the edges. And inside those are conditional probabilities, which are updated when we change things further upstream or downstream. Next slide, please. The basic idea is we're making decisions under uncertainty. We don't always know precisely everything that we would like to, but we still need to make a decision. And the reason we harness probability theory is it's a good method for doing this, and it's the one we're going to use today. So we want to combine all the available information, and we want some way of comparing different strategies. Should we spend money on this item or on that item, or should we save our money? Is it really not worth spending money at all? And the way we do this is called expert utility. So the decision maker has to decide what they mean by better and what they mean by worse. And because numbers are easier to compare than qualitative statements, we use numbers to express that. So for example, if we had some socks and they were very soft, we could say these socks have softness 2 and these socks have softness 3. And that's easy to say, well, I think this is a bit softer because it's kind of fluffier. So that's a little bit more easy to describe. So next slide, please. Thank you, Hannah. So here is a simple example, and thank you to my colleague Tace Fonseca for this example. Suppose we have a little system which has 3 nodes in it, and they are connected as the diagram shows. We have file format, which influences the tools to render, and tools to render, which influences renderability. Suppose we have 2 kinds of files, type A and type B, and that we have tools to render or we don't, and renderability is achieved or it's not achieved. Next slide, please. So we see here for the box on the top that the file format, well, we've got 60% of our files are type A and 40% of them are type B, which means if you pulled a file at random, the probability of you picking a type A file would be 0.6, and the probability of picking a type B file would be 0.4. Going down to the next one, tools to render. Well, if you have file format type A, the probability that you don't have tools to render is 20%, and the probability you do is 80%. If you have file format type B, this is obviously a problematic file format type, there's a 70% chance you won't have the tools to render it and only a 30% chance that you will. Going down to renderability, you've either got tools to render available or not available. If they are available, the chances that you don't achieve renderability are just 10%, and the chances that you do achieve renderability is 90%. If you don't have the tools to render, then the chances that you don't achieve rendering is 85%, but there's still a 15% chance that you might. Next slide, please. So suppose we want to compare different strategies. We've got 2 policies. We're going to buy a new tool to render, or we're not going to make any changes. We're going to save that money. And we say, what are our utilities? And utility 2, if renderability is achieved with the new tool, and utility 1, if renderability is not achieved with the new tool. If we save our money and we go for policy 2, then renderability being achieved is only a utility of 0.5, but we get a utility of 4 if it's not achieved. So what is the best decision? We want to make this number as big as possible. Next slide, please. So this is how we would calculate it. So suppose we know that the probability that renderability is achieved is 60%, 0.6. So under policy 1, we have renderability is achieved is worth 2 in our utilities. So it's 2 times 0.6, which is the probability. And then if renderability is achieved is a 0.6 probability, then it's not achieved is a 0.4 probability. And we multiply that by the renderability is not achieved utility, which is 1. And the total score comes out at 1.6. So under policy 2, we have that 0.6, we multiply it by the renderability is achieved of 0.5, and then we multiply the renderability is not achieved by 4, and we get 1.9. And so the best policy is policy 2, Don't change the system, save your money. However, if renderability being achieved is a 70% chance, 0.7, then the best decision would change. And let's see how that works. Well, now we have 0.7 for renderability is achieved and 0.3 for renderability is not achieved. And again, we go through the same calculation. 0.7 multiplied by the utility of renderability is achieved is 2. And then 0.3 times the renderability is not achieved 1 for policy 1, we get 1.7. And under policy 2, we do the same calculation, but the 70% is multiplied by 0.5 and the 30% is multiplied by 4. And in this case, our utility is only 1.55. Now, you can have a discussion about whether the difference is really a meaningful difference, but you have at least got a basis for discussion there of what you mean by which one is better. Next slide, please. So structured expert judgment, what does that mean? Well, of course, to get all these conditional probabilities, we need some kind of data. If we've got measurement data, like what proportion of files are born digital, for example, that might be hard data that we actually have. If we've got survey data, we can say, well, what's the probability you've got tools to render, for example? And if we don't have any data, how are we going to get it? Well, one way is structured expert judgment. And that doesn't mean just phone a friend. It means actually in a structured way, you get a group of experts together to give you estimates and then you pool them. What's the best way to do this? Well, we do need a diversity of opinion. We do need independence, people drawing on their own experiences. We do need, in this case, a variety of archives so that people are drawing on different knowledge. People who've come through different pathways are really important. They've seen different things, they have different experiences, different intuitions. And then we need to aggregate those answers together. So we have some way of getting, say, 15 experts with their 15 estimates and getting them together into a single estimate that we can use as data. We do note that what we ask the experts and how we ask them does influence their answers. A lot of psychology work has been done studying this process of judgment under uncertainty. And we know that there are heuristics and cognitive biases. So, for example, if you're going into a salary negotiation, the first person to mention a number kind of anchors the numbers that you're going to be talking about. Next slide, please. So we use the IDEA protocol. There are other protocols available, but they all broadly fall into this pre-elicitation, elicitation, and post-elicitation phase. So the pre-elicitation, we had to define the problem. This is the preliminary work that Alex was describing. What's the problem? What's the structure of the problem? What data do we have? What data do we need? And so on. We need to find some data, which is going to be called validation data, and I'll explain in a moment what that means. And we need to frame the questions so that they're nice and clear. And we do need to train the experts a little bit into what's going to be expected of them. So this particular protocol, investigate. So the first thing is, it depends on the particular subject matter. You might send out research papers. You might get people to read their reports of the industry or of their archive or whatever. And then you ask each individual to give you their estimates. Then you anonymize those and discuss them in a facilitated discussion, facilitated so that you don't get the same person talking all the time. And then you ask for a second set of individual estimates. This allows people who've perhaps misunderstood the question to revise their estimates. People who are very certain they got it right the first time, they can just give the same answer again. That's absolutely fine. And the reason why they're private is if your boss is in the room, there might be reasons why you need to be seen to agree with them, even if you really don't. So if it's private, you can just say what you actually mean, and that's much more valuable data for us. And then finally, we need to aggregate them. Next slide, please. So the way we ask the questions is one way in which we mitigate some of those biases. Now, if we ask any of us for our best estimate and then an upper and lower plausible bound, we're probably just going to put plus or minus the same amount. But if the first thing we ask for is how low could this quantity be? Then that gives us a different thing to think about. And then how high could it be? And very often people don't put then the 50% in the middle because that doesn't reflect their true belief. So we've got to aggregate all these estimates together. And what we want to do that is to assess the experts for their ability to accurately make these judgments. It's a very hard job, and some people are better at it than others. So then we have these calibration questions, questions which we know the answer to, or we will know the answer to soon. And we can give those questions in the same format to the experts. And then when we come to aggregate, we can say we give the most weight to the people whose scores on the calibration questions were the highest. So we feel that that's going to improve our data quality. Next slide. This is the sort of graph that we get when we're talking about them. So in this case, it's calibration questions. So we do know the answer. You can see the diamond, the black diamond marked R is the right answer. And we see immediately that actually expert D in the red, the R diamond, the right answer, is captured between their lowest plausible and highest plausible bound in every case. So that, that expert is very accurate. And the green one, expert C, also captures it, but their uncertainty bands are much, much wider. The distance between their lowest plausible and their highest plausible is very, very wide. So that expert is very accurate, but not very informative. We see expert B, who seems to be overly optimistic in all cases. Their bands, their lower expert is higher than the right answer in most cases, in fact, all cases. And then we get expert A, whose uncertainty bands are very, very narrow, but often misses the right answer. So that, that expert is not accurate, but is very informative. So we want some kind of balance between accuracy and informativeness as we aggregate all our answers together. Next slide, please. So in IDEA, we involved archivists from a range of archives to be as general as possible. We use this performance weighted aggregation. We facilitate that discussion between the archivists, and this provided data where there wasn't any. It quantified the uncertainty and it enabled the model to be completed. And I think I'm over to David now.
Hello. So, time to show the current model. I think a few of you have seen this before. There are some quite big changes. And this hopefully incorporates most of the feedback we've had from the previous seminars we've done, dissemination events, and the more structured user testing we've been doing over the last few weeks. So it's just reloading now.
This is very exciting, David, because I know you've done so many changes. I've seen this tool so many times, but there's a lot to take in here. There we go. That's it up now.
Yeah, we have a nice new logo, apart from anything else. Now, the homepage is a bit more informative as to what is involved, who it's for. We've got the whole network there. We've got now, there's a sort of set of questions to answer, which we'll look at in more detail in a moment, but we realize that actually it will generally take a little bit of prep for people to answer that. So you can download a PDF of the answers. Sorry, not the answers, the questions. And that will come down as a PDF. Seems to be going a little bit slowly just at the moment. My internet whilst sharing and everything else, and video as well. So that just gives you the standard save dialog, or depending on how your own web browser is set up, it may just automatically go to downloads. Sorry, my internet also just going a little slowly. Cancel out of it instead of trying to save it. Then there's a more detailed page. First time I've had technical issues while doing these demos, sorry.
It's the bravest thing a boy can do, though, is to give a live internet demo. So very well done.
There we go. It was just deciding to finally download it. So brief how-to, setting out which steps to take at a high level. Before you start, a bit about the questions. Mentions also the glossary at the end, so that talks about our definitions. We're now using 4 people to answer these questions. They're based around existing things like the NDSA levels of preservation, the DPC's own rapid assessment model. There's also a couple of things on the kind of general security side. So ISO 27001 is quite a well-known international standard. It's quite heavy though, so it might be a bit much for some smaller organizations. So in the UK, the National Centre for Cybersecurity has these Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, which are a slightly lighter weight approach to internet security. And where we're looking at technical skills for archivists, we've taken elements from the DigCurve framework. And again, there's another link to the questions if you're coming at it there. So let's take a quick look at the glossary as well. So here we're defining some of the general terms. Again, we've often tried to take these from existing vocabularies like the DPC's handbook. And some are a little bit more specific, just to say exactly what we mean in the context of the model. Also saying where we've got data from for the things that are actually built into the model and where we've got probabilities. So generally, the first thing, once you've done your background work and established the details that you're going to need about your archive, the first thing to do is then go and create a model. Little quick warning, if you go away from the site and don't come back, after 15 minutes it will disconnect and anything you've done will be lost. Nothing is saved, so quite a lot of people seem to have actually quite liked that, because it means the National Archives has no access to anything you're putting into this. And you start simply by giving it a name. So I call it just TNA Basic, for reasons which will become clear. If we start working through these questions, some of these are exactly the same as before. So this is asking just for a very definite probability as to what you've got. So there's no kind of additional assistance around these, but now these sliders will actually, you can either move them like that, you can click in and use the arrows, or type or whatever, you can use the up and down cursor keys, or if you're clicked on there, you can use the side cursor keys, and you'll see that they're also linked, so they always add up to 100. So I want that balance of things. That represents, this is the thinking about the records we actually hold at National Archives, which is why I'm ignoring surrogates for now. Everything we have is on what we defined as type B. It's good solid tape storage. We always make sure we've got multiple copies of everything. And we also have, this has changed a bit now, this asks these 2 bits slightly separately, and we also have this, if we have additional copies, we also have processes in place where if one of those copies was found to be damaged or corrupted, we have ways of refreshing that copy and making sure we always keep good copies. And this is about keeping copies off-site, so we do indeed send at least 1 copy of our material off-site for everything, so set that to 100% too. We reordered these questions slightly as well, and we realised that the ordering was a bit less helpful sometimes, or a bit less logical. So then the second question is about where we're thinking about physical risks to those materials. Either if we've only got it in one location, we're only thinking still about floods, particularly here, as that's the main physical risk in the UK. So either yes, there's then good protection against the floods if you've got everything on site, or no, there isn't, or here not applicable. We're sending copies off-site, so even if our main site gets flooded, we believe we'll be able to get to the off-site copy and recover from that. And then thinking about floods again, we are looking at the UK government flood risk. So hopefully you can still see that as I've changed to this site. So if I put in the National Archives postcode, here's a postcode specific to the National Archives. It tells us it's very low risk, and you can look at a map if you want to see that as well in a slightly different way. So that the crosshairs is on the National Archives, so this is the very low risk area. You can see the river itself. Kew Gardens is rather less protected. They're quite high risk there, but there's levees running along here, so that's why, despite the proximity to the river, we're relatively low risk. So we leave that at very low. Now this is asking about the checksums for the material. So because of our relationship with government departments and the legal situation, we've been able to generally enforce that we will get, I don't know why I thought I was trying to leave there. We will get those checksums from them. We have a small percentage of our files which going back to the early days before we'd really got it established, where we only generated checksums when we finally ingested them into a more formal system. So we don't have that real link right back to the originator of the files. So it's possible that they've changed between the time they were transferred to us and when we established that checksum. But now looking at system security, the National Archives does have ISO 27001. We also did a specific penetration test against our digital archiving systems, and we've dealt with the things that came up, or maybe it was just some very small recommendations of absolutely best practice, but there weren't things that were going to really impact on the security of the system. So the other options obviously are here and no test. There's some critical issues we haven't addressed yet, things that were defined as severe. And we also, now we're looking slightly more digital preservation specific. So thinking about the NDSA levels of preservation, which if you're less familiar with them or you're just going through, you can, again, it's linked there and you can have a quick look at those. All the links like that should open in a new tab in your browser, or a new browser if it's in support tabs. So if you were less familiar, you can have a quick look. So we are happy that we're at level 4 on this is particularly around the control functional area within those. This is asking about whether we've got a virus check and the recorded result for all of that. So again, there's a small proportion of the very old material where we never actually formally recorded the virus check. So I will just say no for that. Now moving on to the information management within our system. So again, referring to the NDSA levels of preservation, but now looking at metadata. We think we're still only actually at level 3 on that. Some of these we sort of actually put the model I'm looking at here, which we were developing when we were looking at the spending review in the UK. So looking at how to get money from Treasury, we came up with percentages before we had put these in. So some of these I'm slightly tweaking the answers so that I get the percentage I know we want, even if it looks a little odd. So the content level I'm going to set as 1 for this. And then the next questions both refer to the DPC rapid assessment model. And both of those we're on level 4th level optimized. And now technical skills, this is setting out the statements from the DigiCurve framework. And again, the link is there for anyone who's less familiar with that. So here we've got a big department, we've got over 30 people, we've got people with a good range of skills. So we believe we're on all of those. This has changed a bit. We get the quick overview here now. You can edit, so you can change the model name. There was the facility to add comments all the way through to record perhaps some of the reasoning behind it. If you haven't done that, you can add them again here. You can delete a model altogether. This was the stage where people were often kind of getting to and then saying, and now what? So now we specifically ask that question, what next? It will come up with some prompts. You can either view results, you can create a scenario to see how it would change your risk score, or you can go and create another basic model. So here, right, so we were only looking at the records we hold, so we could create another model to look just at the surrogates we hold, perhaps. But I'm going to create a scenario. So as I said, this was kind of, we need to select a model, and it will then give us the next. So we were thinking here about various things would change. So as I mentioned, we were thinking in the context of a spending review. So our first look at things was to think about what would change over time. So possibly we would have some issues around that as our tape library gets older. Our checksum balance, we think will get changed very slightly. Things might happen with system security and our information management. I know, so information management is fine. And our technical skills. So we can select the various inputs, see exactly what we would change for those. We can name this as well. So we would still be aiming to make an additional copy of everything. But it's possible that as our tape library gets older, it might struggle to actually renew those copies if something else went wrong. So we just drop that to 98%. Our checksums, as we said, we're getting more material. It was only the very old, small set of very old material. So over time, that effectively becomes so small it ceases to register. Our system security, we'll assume the organization maintains ISO 27001, but perhaps the funding changes. We're only getting the same money in 3 years' time that we're getting now. We probably won't have been able to renew that penetration test, so it will be a bit out of date. So we'll assume now we haven't done that test. There might be issues that have come up, maybe because we haven't been able to maintain patching and things so much either. But our basic digital archiving side is more the same. And yeah, I think we are leaving that as well. And again, if we've lost a few people over time and haven't been able to replace them because of funding and so on, then perhaps our ability to apply particular technological solutions has dropped slightly, and our knowledge of information technology definitions and skills, and our ability to continuously monitor and evaluate digital curation technologies has perhaps dropped off slightly. So again, that's that done. So if we now look at our view results, we can now see that against here, and we can see our renderability has dropped slightly. So this was assuming we just had the same funding in future. When we thought about this a bit more, we were actually thinking that perhaps our, sorry, did that wrong. perhaps our initial model, just using the basic inputs and questions that are there, perhaps that was a bit pessimistic. So this is where we haven't demonstrated this so much in the past. We can use some of the advanced customization, and we can take our basic model and we can directly tweak some of those underlying probability tables that Martine was explaining. So if we look at the actual risk of obsolescence within our system, we would say that actually now the chances of our tapes becoming obsolete are much lower than we're now decided to use the upper bound from those calculations that Martine was telling us about from the elicitation. So that gives us an improved behavior on that. We also, some of these really detailed bits, conditions of use, again, because of our the relationship between the National Archives and government departments, we work very hard to make sure that they tell us exactly what the conditions of use are before they transfer. So we decided we could move that up a lot for all types of material. And again, similarly with our tools to render, we are very specific about needing to know what those are. I'm only going to change the ones where technical skills are good, because that's the most, that's the one where we're sitting. Oops. And as we see here, the tables now here will again automatically ensure that everything adds up to 1. And also the other one we decided when we were building this model we could improve from the standard model is around the gathering of technical metadata, because our policies and again the relationship we have with government departments was such that again we felt that using the upper bound from those from the elicitation would also be appropriate. And now, so that was the various different ones I wanted to change. I've called it TNO Advanced. I've created it as a separate model rather than a scenario. And then that we store that, and now we get that as well. So we see that it's saying that our current position is actually a lot stronger. A lot of those things, like those improvements in obsolescence and so on, we would actually think that if we weren't able to keep things going, then those would actually drop off over time. We wouldn't be able to renew our tape library, so our obsolescence risk would get higher and go back to the median level. Once you've done all the modeling and so on you want, you can either go back to view results and see the set together. It's just updating with the additional one. You see that a scenario derived from a model is grouped together. So you see that that same funding one is derived from that baseline. And then also you can choose to download. So again here, these are selected. It's perhaps not absolutely clear, but when they're highlighted, those would download. You've got 3 options for download. You can generate a PDF, which will be a nice format to view and share with people. You can get a CSV of these, which means you could then draw more of your own graphs and do further analysis in Excel or whatever. And you can download the kind of binary format, which then also allows you to re-upload that into the model again in future, so you don't have to go through and re-answer your questions. If you, as we said, if you don't do that download, we don't save the data for you. There's no login and everything, as you can see. So you'd have to come back and answer everything again. Doing that means you can just come back, and there is an upload previous model there as well, so you can just come back and upload and start generating more scenarios or do some of those more advanced tweaks. So the PDF, take a moment. Again, I'll just, oh, we have to briefly stop sharing and switch to the PDF when it opens. Oh no, it was doing it in the same window. Sorry, I will reshare. Been very slow to open. We'll maybe come back to that at the end and let. Oh no, I think I just haven't clicked the final share button, but we'll come back maybe to just quickly show that at the end. I perhaps took a little longer over that than I should have done. So back to Alex.
It's been really very good, David. We should move on if that's okay. Alex has some kind of thoughts to wrap up before we move on to questions, and I can see a few questions piling up in the chat box. So Alex, do you want to take over and just give us a kind of final thoughts and observations? And next
Yep, I will do. Hannah, if you could share the final slide. It's just to say that diagram is freely available on the web. We can put the address in the chat box. I think it's got a JR at the end for our suppliers, which will come off at the when we've got the final version. It's currently a prototype, and how it's used and the feedback we receive for the next year will decide where we take it next. So please do use it and send us your thoughts. There's a link to the email in the footer of the page, and we could add that to the chat as well. We're hoping that it will prove as useful a tool as Droid and Pronom have for the archive community, and that we'll have the opportunity to fund further development, including accessibility improvements, which we will regularly review and update with new evidence as it becomes available. So we'd also like to keep adding more data to make it more relevant to a wider audience. It's UK-based, UK-centric at the moment, while increasing the risks that it covers as well. So yes, please do put your questions in the chat, and we're happy to answer them. Thanks.
Super. Well, listen, we should, before we move on to questions, let's have a quick round of applause, I think, for the project team, because it's been a really impressive demonstration, really first rate, and a lot of changes since the last time I saw this, for sure, which has been probably about 3 months now. So fantastic. So I've got quite a few questions piling up into the chat box. I think Helen Dafter was the first out of the box with Helen from the Postal Museum with a question about penetration testing. Helen, are you still with us online? It's always best if you're able to, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's minor detail, but when you're talking about penetration testing, I noticed the options of critical issues and severe issues, and it wasn't obvious to me what the difference was between what makes a critical issue and what makes a severe issue.
Yeah, so I think that they are fairly standard definitions within that kind of realm. So, you know, critical issues are things that absolutely you should really fix right now. It's a kind of 0-day bug. Your security would be completely compromised right now if someone did that. Critical, you know, it's slightly less severe. You should still fix it pretty quickly, but it would take more effort or a bit more access to be able to exploit it and so on. So they should be fairly standard definitions. If you had a penetration test and you had the report, they would be kind of divided up in that way. So it'd be pretty clear if you've actually done it.
Helpful.
Thank you, Helen, and thanks for the clarification, David. We also had a question quickly in the chat box, also from Paul Stokes. Paul, are you still with us? I see you're still there. Do you want to voice the question?
Yeah, it's just a quickie. First of all, my first impression is wow, fantastic. But also, as a secondary impression, it's very complex for someone who isn't necessarily well versed in preservation and preservation issues. So my question is essentially, and they would have difficulties in knowing where to start. So are there any standard templates that could be used to baseline a getting started type organization? This is where you should start. These are the sort of figures you might be looking at for a startup situation. Tweak away.
Yes, there will be. We didn't quite have time to get them in. We've developed a model which we're kind of talking about as just representing commercial backup. So that would be kind of a starting point. This is where you're doing something, you're backing things up, and also hopefully that will help with one of the big questions that's often asked about digital preservation is how does preservation differ from backup? So if we start by showing what you get by backup, which is you get a certain amount of stuff on the renderability side, you're keeping pretty well, you should be keeping things bit preserved to a certain level, but typically you won't have that intellectual control over things. You won't necessarily know what things are where. You might have a little bit of kind of an inventory of what was backed up when. So that would be one starting point. Then we probably will have something pretty similar to the TNA model that I've just demonstrated as kind of the high end. And hopefully, actually, this is where we do kind of need people to start doing this and maybe sharing, even if they, as we said, and I see Angeline has asked again, we're not saving stuff within it, but if people are happy to share maybe, the percentages just in an anonymized way, even we could start to build something that's kind of a median UK archives. So we would have that starting point, you're backing everything up, great. How do I start moving from there? This is where sort of the general archives in the UK are somewhere around here. So we need to, might want to be trying to get up to there, and then TNA, we think we're probably pretty high up on the outlying end, because we do have the resources and things compared to a lot of places. So that would give a kind of spread to help people. And you could start from that kind of backup and say, okay, so if we started doing more on the extracting technical metadata and things, we would see things moving up and improving our technical skills. You'd see that moving up from that baseline level.
I would like to mention that, and I'm going to abuse my microphone privilege, because peer comparison is, in my experience, a very strong way of making a case for extra funding and resources. So if there could be any form of peer comparison built into this, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's where, asking for feedback, if people were prepared to at least share their kind of final scores. And one thing I didn't show on the screen, on those tables at the end, if you click show, it actually lists all the results. And it's now opened the PDF for me. So if I just quickly share the PDF again. So you get the whole list here of your responses and so on. So if people were prepared to share those, maybe in a slightly more anonymized way, or the CSV or the download model, we could use those to build up a bit more of an average. And maybe that, again, it might be sensible to divide it into county record offices versus university archives and so on, because different sectors have slightly different sets of resources and so on.
I wonder if I can bring Angeline into the conversation on a related note. Angeline had a question also in the chat box specifically about the saving results. Angeline, are you there? Yeah, I see you.
Yes, I am. Thanks, William. Yeah, from where I sit, not saving is actually a good thing for us, because then we can actually go in there and use the system without having to discuss security of information and take it up and down our management suite. So maybe, and I agree, peer comparison is something that we also want to benefit from. So maybe sharing on a kind of voluntary basis, and keeping, the non-saving component in the system allows
absolutely.
to
So
use it.
The option, you can download these reports out the end. What you do with those is entirely up to you. Nothing remains in the system after your session has ended, and there's no way anyone can see into the session while you're doing it. So it's all secure in that way. And then, as I say, yeah, if it's just an anonymized thing, you want to say this was the kind of percentages you were at, and we could work out a way of scoring it to get back to those percentages probably, or if you wanted to give some slightly tweaked answers that hide slightly some of your issues if there are any particularly sensitive areas and things like that, and that would be useful.
That's exactly the kind of feedback that we really want to hear. So takes on anonymization of data, being able to save things against not being able to save things are all really good feedback for us to take forward and decide how we develop the model further. Thank you.
So just to point out then a couple of things which are in the chat box. So in terms of feedback, there I noticed, I think it was Alex had put an email address into the feedback box. So if you want to contact them in the chat box, rather, you'll see the feedback mechanism or an email address to contact there. There's also a link to a website. Do you want to just say what that was? Which what does that link to, and why is that relevant?
So that is the current version that I've just demoed. Is that the one? Yeah.
And that's free for us to use now.
We will.
That's the point, isn't it?
It is, yes. I mean, it's not the absolutely final one. There will probably be a few more tweaks, but that's the version we've just demoed. We will probably take that -jr off for the kind of final one that's out there when we've used up the last of our development resource. But that's where we're at today. So if people wanted to start playing a bit with that, then that'd be great.
So that gives people an opportunity, having taken what you've said and what we've demonstrated and the context that's been put in, gives people the opportunity to come back and have a go at this at home again. You know, that kind of line they used to use in the TV shows, not to try something at home. Well, I think the opposite applies here, doesn't it? We encourage you to try this at home. Okay, so listen, we're just past the hour now, just 3 minutes past the hour. So maybe I'll very quickly pause and invite any other thoughts or questions. And from the team, anything you really want to underline, or any points you feel that we've missed, or any observations that have just occurred to you in the last dying minutes of the webinar?
No, just really welcome any feedback. Definitely.
Fantastic.
Good or bad.
Feedback is a good segue for me, because there is a little feedback and evaluation form as well. Maybe get Jet, and John's on the button as usual. John's put the link to that again into the chat box. Very brief, right? It's very brief. As you said at the start, Alex, our role at the DPC is to help with a bit of the community validation of this project, including dissemination, but also bits of evaluation from the wider community. We do that kind of independently. That's the point. We've not been directly involved in the building of this, so it's our job to act as a kind of mediator of community feedback. And I have to say, it's been a pleasure to do, and a surprise to have done so much of it online, but also an opportunity to bring people in from all over the world really into a process which otherwise might have been much more face-to-face. So a warm welcome to you all. A kind of strange thing to say at the end, but I'm seeing we've got colleagues from Australia, colleagues from North America, colleagues from Canada, from all around Europe. So it's wonderful to be able to share this with you. And I think probably without much further ado then, to thank you all for your time, Alex and David, and Hannah behind the scenes with the slides, and Martine for the presentation. Thanks also to the project team. I see Thijs briefly was on the call. Many thanks to you all for your hard work. Did I mention they are finalists in the Digital Preservation Awards? I should probably have done that. And many compliments on that. And we should probably therefore quick round of applause and then bring the conversation to a close. So thank you all very much.